of constitutional underpinnings that I want to address real quickly is the theme of checks and balances that exist in our government. And I made a couple of notes here that you might want to pay attention to. So just remember for the test that the legislative branch includes the House of Representatives and the Senate, and the main job of that branch is to make laws. The executive branch includes the president and his cabinet. The main job of that branch is to enforce the laws. And finally, the judicial branch includes the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts, and that job is to interpret laws. And this was all established in the Constitution and influenced by Montesquieu's ideas of separation of powers through a system of checks and balances. Okay. There's also a number of ways in which the function of the government can change outside of the Constitution. The Constitution can be amended, as we've seen that's happened 27 times. However, amendments like the original Constitution must be ratified by the states. So a couple examples of the function of government changing outside the Constitution includes the Elastic Clause, which we find in Article 1, Section 8. And this grants Congress the right to make federal laws necessary for the government's needs, and it allowed for the creation of various government entities and bureaucracies, including the cabinet. Executive orders and executive agreements allow the president to act without the approval of the legislature. These can serve as a variety of roles and may act similarly to laws or treaties. And in 1803, the Supreme Court gave itself the power to overturn laws passed by the legislature. When there's a conflict between state and federal law supersedes the state law, and we see that in the Supremacy Clause. For instance, a state is prevented from instituting voting rules in violation of federal law. And according to the Supremacy Clause, state laws must comply with federal and international law to be valid. While the federal government can make laws, there are several powers specifically denied to the U.S. federal government. The rights of the federal government also include significant control over spending. The federal government funds a number of programs ranging from social services to road construction. And these funds are often administered by the states, but may have rules or conditions imposed by the federal government. And this allows for the implementation of some federal controls and standards like the No Child Left Behind program. And the states are free to design their own government, but each state has a legislative, judicial, and executive branch with similar checks and balances. But all but one state have both a House and a Senate, and all have an executive branch headed by the state governor. And finally, state courts can assess and interpret state laws just as the federal courts can. So now we're going to move into political ideology and action. And political thought or opinion is simply what we, the people or the public, think the government, including politicians, and policy decisions should be. And opinions are formed through a process called political socialization. Political socialization begins in childhood and forms our political thoughts and ideas. There are a number of different political socialization tools, each with its own impact on political ideology. So let's start with the family. The family is the first tool of political socialization. While children are not politically active, they will, in many cases, take on the ideology of their parents and the moral and social values of one generation passed down from one generation to the next. And for instance, a child in a blue-collar family may grow up believing in the importance of labor unions. Looking at location, which also impacts political socialization. Rural areas are more typically conservative than less urban ones, which tend to be more liberal. And schools, religious institutions, and mass media all can impact political socialization in childhood in various ways. Higher education at college is a significant factor in political socialization and can be a time of significant change in political thought and ideology. And then just overall life experience can shape political viewpoints. For instance, living without health coverage might cause you to change your opinions about nationalized healthcare system or something along those lines. And there are 3 different political ideologies in the United States. And these ideologies are made up of opinions on a number of different subjects. Liberals usually prefer greater government involvement and influence in order to limit the power of commercial and cultural entities, maximize social justice, and minimize social inequality. Liberals also tend to strongly favor the separation of church and state and support a robust, capable government that prioritizes fairness for all citizens. Conservatives usually favor less government involvement and influence, preferring that power concentrate in private rather than public hands. Conservatives tend to strongly prefer slower social change that is organic to a society's existing culture and institutions, and a small government with only such powers are necessary to ensure freedom for all citizens. And lastly, independents do not fit neatly into either category, but opinions vary among them, and there is a relatively little consistency in this group. One group of independents, called moderates, attempt to bridge the gap between conservatives and liberals, choosing pragmatic approaches to issues that are in line with the majority public opinion. Other independents may favor various combinations of liberal and conservative ideas or outright rejection of both. And besides political socialization, there are other factors that affect political opinion and ideology. And other factors may also affect political belief in different ways. These are not decisive, and individuals may not be accurately represented by these factors. So race is frequently correlated with political views for social reasons. African Americans, for instance, are more likely to identify as culturally conservative, but overwhelmingly vote liberal due to consistent liberal support for civil rights and reforming institutional racism. Religious affiliation is also linked with political ideology. Jews, Catholics, mainline Protestants, and non-religious people tend to vote slightly more liberal, while evangelical Protestants and Mormons strongly tend to vote conservative. And women are typically more liberal than men, and income may also impact political ideology. However, it does so in varied ways. You'll find it no surprise that most people are concerned about issues that are significant to their own community or daily lives. For instance, a parent would likely feel significant interest in issues involving their local school district, but that same parent might be less concerned about military funding. On the other hand, a soldier is likely deeply concerned with military funding and policy. Polling helps politicians recognize issues of concern to the general public. And entire organizations exist to track public opinion and determine what people think of all sorts of things. These are used for both political and marketing research. Polling is the most common means of assessing public opinion. While Gallup polls are the best known, there are many different ways to poll people and to track the thoughts and concerns of people. These include things like the Nielsen rating for TV. Polls and other rating systems commonly look at not only issues, but also demographics, including age and income. They also assess how strongly people feel and how likely they are to alter their opinion. Some polls, like approval polls, are conducted quite often. Polls are not completely accurate and typically note a possible sampling error. Politicians rely upon polls to judge which issues matter to their constituents or voting body. And there are several specific traits which are tracked with regard to public opinion. For example, saliency measures the importance of an issue to a particular group. For instance, education is of greatest importance to parents, while student loans might be particularly important or salient to college-age voters. Intensity tracks how strongly a particular group feels about a given issue. Disability rights groups passionately advocate for reform, like the American with Disabilities Act, and so that would be a high level of intensity regarding that issue. Stability monitors the likelihood of change on a particular decision. Support for an issue like the war in Iraq or Afghanistan has varied, and so stability is what determines that variation. And then lastly, elections are the most powerful way for the public to express their opinion. For instance, a politician who votes to cut Social Security might then find he fails to be reelected. And so elections are the most reflective way of measuring public opinion. And the media, let's talk about the media real quick. Political ideology is the result of political socialization. However, the media also impacts what we think about issues and what we may engage politically with these issues, how we may engage politically with these issues. And the mass media includes newspapers, TV, and online news programs of various sorts, political radio, news, magazines, websites, news blogs. And the media often has its own political ideology depending on the source you choose to follow. The media does impose its own form of social control by setting the public agenda, and news outlets choose which issues to cover and which are less important and receive less coverage. While the mass media may influence the public opinion, the influence is lessened in terms of public opinion. This is primarily the result of self-selection. For instance, conservatives are more likely to listen to talk radio or watch Fox News, while liberals might read the Huffington Post or watch MSNBC. Political thought influences how politically active people are, who they choose to vote for in elections, and even whether they vote at all. Understanding political socialization and ideology will help you to understand and recognize how political parties function within the United States government. And that's